Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink, I have in sample form, but it's one of the Akkerman inks. Somebody actually sent me a video that explains how you pronounce these inks, and I looked it up and I listened very carefully before I started recording. This is now my 4th video, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but I think it's Staten-Generaal Rood? Staten-Generaal Rood? But yeah, I know rude is actually sounds more like road. That's their word for red. It's number 17. Yes. So this is sort of a magenta-maroony sort of color. And actually the sample was provided by the wonderful Mysterious Benefactor. So if you appreciate the review, please send him your appreciation. 2 pens I used were these. This is a JinHao X450, which is pretty broad and pretty wet generally, and that's going to come in handy. And this is a Pilot Metropolitan with a Japanese fine nib, which is ridiculously fine, practically, in my opinion. It's like trying to write with a corner of a razor blade. And sometimes I have about as much luck using it as trying to write with a razor blade, because it is so sharp. But yeah, yes. Let's look at some comparisons. The sort of best I could do. So here's number 17. And here is Noodler's Ottoman Rose. As you can see, quite similar. And then I'm very sorry, the bottle that this came in literally exploded when I bought it and destroyed the label. But this is an Architect ink, which is a rebottled diamine ink from X Fountain Pens. A rebottled Diatramentus ink from X Fountain Pens. And is very similar, but I don't know the name, which is helpful to no one, I'm sure. Here is Diamine's Amaranth? I don't know how to pronounce that either. God, it's just one of those days. As you can see, this is probably a little dustier, a little more pink, whereas this is just a tiny bit more maroon. And then lastly, Private Reserve's Plum, which is nowhere near as close as the other ones, but I like to have at least 4 comparables. And this, yes, was the most comparable. Although in some of the tests I compared to my bottle of Black Swan and Australian Roses, which I do not think is the correct color, and therefore I've resisted reviewing it. I also compared it to Yamabudo in another test. No, actually Plum was closer than Yamabudo, sadly. So apparently I was wrong when I said that, but yes. Let's look at some chromatography. Bear with me. Yes. So this one on the left, the one with the little D in the corner, is the one that I let dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but I feel like it's taught me some stuff over the years. Yes, this one on the right, as you're supposed to do it, you can definitely see where that initial drop was put. It's a bit light and hazy, and there's sort of this chalky pink color going up. And then in areas we get this magenta. Now, the one that I let dry, that dot is definitely more pronounced, and the magenta up at the top is not as noticeable. So there is an effect, but Alright, chemical tests. Now, as you can see, the water test did get it moving, at least a bit, but not completely getting rid of it. The 1/3 bleach solution turned it sort of this pithy yellow before getting rid of it, but as you can tell, actually didn't completely get rid of it. Now, the ammonia pen flash, fascinating enough, did not get it moving as much as the water. And hydrogen peroxide did get it moving, but it also started to affect the paper, so I sopped it up fairly quickly. Now, paper test, top-down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Now, before we get further into the test, I should say that there was something on my fingers that I was unaware of, some oily substance that affected a few of the tests before I figured it out and washed my hands. So it's going to look like there's some hard starts, but that is mostly me. As you can tell, the stuff up here is actually fine and clear, and that's because I was holding the bottom of the page as I was writing it. But then when I got to the bottom of the page, you're going to see things get a little wonky, especially with that X450, so yeah, but ignore that. Now this because of something about the color of this ink and the way it looks when I was writing, I thought it would be very undersaturated, but in fact it's not. This is a very well saturated ink. It just has this sort of light dusty color, which I find kind of fascinating, despite the fact that, and I make no secret of it, I hate pink. I hate it. I hate it. But anyways, that Japanese fine took 9 seconds to dry. The generally fairly broad and wet JinHao took 22, and that's because this is a mildly dry ink, or at least my sample was. I'd say it's maybe a 4.5 out of 10. So it is just a little on the dry side, so that X450 being a bit wet was actually kind of a help. Now I hope this comes through. There is this very dark, almost black halo outline around the wettest parts of the writing, which creates a very intense contrast. Yes, it's most obvious in the X450, however, this is the area where I was struggling with the residual oil from my hand. But yeah, it's a very fascinating effect because there's no sheen. It's just this dark black halo. But yeah, say here the paper's wonky. No, it is not the paper. Now there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Everything you see here, that is me redacting with my carbon brush pen. But yeah, water test, there is not a lot of water resistance. Now, this is the edge of a large piece of Sayas paper, and so it was being affected environmentally. So I think a large reason why a lot of this remained behind is just because it had become a more absorbent paper. So, but yeah, a lot of it's gone. Did make a little bit of a mess. Now, next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. It's lovely. The more I use it, the more I enjoy it. This Japanese fine on here took 13 seconds to dry. Fairly broad and wet JinHao took 26. Now, as you can see, there is some very nice shading, and with that X450, and again, the further down the page we get, the more trouble that X450 gives me because I was holding the bottom of the... what was I doing? But yes, come on, camera. I really hope you can see this intense dark outline that we get around the wettest parts. It's almost like somebody went around the edges of it with a very fine tip black marker and outlined it, because it is a very pronounced dark outline, which I really enjoy. It gives us a very interesting effect. Now, yes, this is where I was having trouble, but here it is most obvious. Yeah, I think it creates a very interesting contrast because there's this very dark outline. So, but yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Very good in that regard. Especially no echo at all with that Japanese fine. It's like nothing's written at all. But yeah, the water test, the Japanese fine is really, really gone. But bear in mind, that is a razor fine nib. It is a slightly dry writing ink. Yeah, it's gone. But there are, weirdly, half a letter each practically for that X450. And I think that's just a matter of the X450 is a broader, wetter nib. It was putting down more ink, so there's just more to remain. Now, next up is Rhodia, 80 gram per square meter. Again, it's kind of more of the same. We have a wonderful breadth of shading. We have an intense dark outline. And it was until I got right about here and I was just going mad with frustration that I got up and washed my hands, and then, as you can tell, everything from here on is just much better. But yeah, very dark halo effect, which I enjoy. It creates a wonderful contrast, really sort of makes it pop. Good saturation. That Japanese fine took 10 seconds to dry. The fairly broad and wet JinHao took 23, especially now that I could get it to behave. But yeah, lovely halo effect. No bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. All good in that regard. And yeah, here it didn't dye the page much, which was kind of nice, a nice change, but the fine is really, really gone. Again, that X450, we get like half of each letter, which is curious and amusing. But Now, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo, and it kind of did all of that except for sheen. Now, generally this dark halo outline thing that we see, a lot of times that will very easily turn into sheen with the right paper. Here it does not. If anything, it just turns it so dark that it's almost black. So here I'd say that dark outline, the contrast is at its most intense. But since I enjoy it, I like that. But yeah. Now the Japanese fine took 15 seconds to dry. The fairly broad and wet JinHao took 33. But again, this is a little dry writing. And I screwed up, so I had to redact that. But anyways, it's really lovely looking. And I say that begrudgingly because I don't like pink, but the effect is very nice. And again, the water test had a bit of an uh-oh. So, as I say here, there's maybe some echo with the X450 just because it is fairly dark ink where there's a dark halo, and since the X450 is putting down more ink, we are getting more of the halo, and it is a broader nib. And this is very thin paper, so if you're obscenely sensitive to it like I am, it might bother you a little bit. But like this bit right here, where my finger is running over, that's the Japanese fine. And it looks like there's nothing written on that side. So if you're super sensitive to it, that's definitely something to consider. Try using a Japanese fine. Now, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, and this paper is known for letting ink just slide away when you add more water. And it is amazing how much it did that with that Japanese fine. That is just gone. I mean, it practically looks like I didn't write that bit. So you can see the barest, tiniest little bit of the A. But yeah, but what's funny is we still get half of each letter for the X450, at least in water, and then we get like a little bit of something for a test. So that is almost amusing. Now for the next 3 tests, I only use that Japanese fine except to write the name. And this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. It's quite possibly the worst paper in the world. It might very well be the worst paper I've ever encountered, and I've encountered more paper than I'd care to admit. In fact, more paper than I'd care to remember. But, yeah, here we lose shading. We've lost pretty much all the shading. The shading is gone. And we do have a little bit of a spread situation. The line width did increase. Here's that Japanese fine on the Tomoe River. Here it is on the 20-pound. You can see that definitely got a bit broader. But since that pen is already like writing with a razor blade, this is still like a Western fine. So, yeah. We do get some woolliness. And we do get some feathering, which is unfortunate. But this is, again, the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. I can pretty much guarantee you have something that is at least a step up from this, if not several. It took 1.5 seconds to dry, or I feel like I should say absorb. There is a little bit of show through, but again, I think it's just because the ink is like seeping into the page, you know, so like if this is, you know, it's seeping in, but it's not coming out the back. Like it is never dark enough to look like it's coming out the back, nowhere near. And where it gets the closest is here with that scrubby, which is probably me scratching through the page with that razor blade nib. Good lord. Now, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. And that is certainly what happened here. You can see that this is a great deal more remaining than we've seen on the other papers, certainly for that Japanese fine. But you can see that it has gotten lighter, it has expanded a little bit, it has spread a bit. And I don't know, I feel like if I washed it anymore, it would just get blurrier and blurrier. So be very careful around water. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper, which is very common for school children in the United States. This is the type that you'd find in like a spiral notebook, not the kind you'd find in a composition notebook. And lately, this stuff has been feathering a lot. So keep that in mind. That is something that this paper tends to do all on its own as often as possible, seemingly. Now, here it took 1.5 seconds to dry, but I would like to point out how much less it spread than the 20-pound. You can see there is much less of an increase in line width. In fact, if we bring in the Tomoe River, you can see that there's barely any. There's a little bit, but barely any. So, definitely has that going for it. However, we do have some feathering. Yeah. And sometimes it can be the big distracting feathers, which is unfortunate when we look at feathering. And what happened there is the tines of that fine nib actually picked up a fiber from the paper, and that's why I started writing as if it was a very small marker. So that's what I mean by fiber grab. But yeah, we do have feathering, which is unfortunate. But there is no bleed. In fact, even that X450 didn't bleed, and there's barely any echo even, which is really saying something considering this is physically thinner than 20 pound. So yeah, it actually did very well, though it did start to come out the back in the water test. But yeah, speaking of water test, again, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, but here we do have an unfortunate result. It did get a good bit lighter, as you can tell. It did feather, it did explode. And I feel like if there was more water, it would have just gotten even more uncomfortable to read. Now, next up is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate because it's awful. They make you pay a lot of money for it. And here, now it took 6 seconds to dry. You can see the fibers that they mashed into the paper, the pulp. You can see the texture. We've got really ugly woolliness and feathering. And what's amazing is we have spots of full-on bleed, which means it got onto the page below, despite the fact that this is a slightly dry writing ink, and that is a Japanese fine nib. Camera, calm down. Because if you can see, like, the dots where it's coming through, they're fairly dark, which means they came all the way through. Not just that they sunk in or they reached the back, but it's that they sunk in, reached the back, and then even reached out to the next page, which is awful. Awful. That's pretty much unforgivable. With this situation, I mean, it's a dry writing ink, it's Japanese font. Forget it. Moleskine, I hate you. Anyways, here in the water test, as you can see, it's a disaster. Weirdly, it didn't dye the page, but it did absolutely feather and explode, and they're overlapping, and it's just... Moleskine, what you doing? But anyway, so there you go, for your consideration. Akkerman, number 17, Staten-Generaal Rood. Maybe if I just say it really quickly, no one will notice how poorly I'm pronouncing it. Yeah, so number 17, it's an interesting sort of magenta, pinky, kind of maroon such and such. It has this really interesting thing where on premium papers, it doesn't sheen. It just gives you this super intense, dark, like black halo. Slightly dry writing. Interesting effect. For your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.